Good evening, brothers and sisters. This Friday, the Stations of the Cross will be sponsored by our St. Vincent de Paul ministry, and so make sure you have the proper one. There's a unique reflection of the stations with this particular one. Before we begin, the Stations of the Cross is one of the most beautiful traditions we have during this holy season of Lent. And the beautiful history, every time we learn more about the beauty of our Catholic faith, how everything is absolutely rich. We don't do anything by accident. And in particular, the Stations of the Cross. This devotion goes back centuries, all the way back to the time of the Crusades. One of my old parishioners in my other parish, he's a substitute teacher at a public school. And he sent me a text this morning, and he says, "Father, look at what they're teaching the public school kids about the Crusades." And he sent me a screenshot of the paper he had to read to the kids. And you can imagine what they taught about the Crusades there. If you're like me and you're educated in public school, the idea of the Crusades is this: the big bad Catholic Church invaded the peace-loving Muslims in the Holy Land. And the aggressors came there, and they, with their violence, sought to win over more power and more prestige, more wealth. That's what I was taught in school about the Crusades. And when he sent me the screenshot of what he had to read the kids, and one of the kids asked him, "What is a Catholic?" That's how ignorant these kids were about their own history. So frustrated because this parishioner, the convert to Catholicism, and he loves his Catholic faith. In fact, he told me once that converting to Catholicism was one of the greatest decisions ever made for him and his family. He was so frustrated at that child's comment. He threw the sheet aside and he says, and in my old parish, the Catholic Church is right across the high school. It's right there. You can see it from the school. He says, "That is the Catholic Church founded by Jesus Christ." He boldly proclaimed it in that public high school. And he taught them their full history. The Crusades were launched because of 400 years of aggression. So Islam comes out of Saudi Arabia around the 7th century. When the moment Islam started spreading, they started conquering what we see now as the Middle East. All of that used to be Christian. For 400 years, we fought back the armies. And then to the point where the Byzantine emperor, a man by the name of Alexios I, wrote a letter to the Pope begging him, "We need help. Constantinople, which was the empire's capital at that time period, we're going to collapse if you don't send your armies to help us." Pope Urban II was the pope at that time. And on November 27th, 1095, he answered Alexios I's call. And he began to preach the Crusades. It would take 3 years for Europe to muster its army. If you can imagine, it takes a long time to send an entire army across a continent. How many of you have any French heritage, by the way? If you have any French in you. I see little hands here and there. Your ancestors 1,000 years ago answered the call. And your sons were sent. 40,000 of them went. By the time they get to the walls of Jerusalem, only 17,000 remained out of that 40,000. It was not a call of aggression by the big bad Catholic Church, as we're taught in public school and shown in the movies. It was a war, an existential threat. I know that's directly contrary to what we've been fed in our education. And so when the Crusaders started to come back, and they told stories about Jerusalem and seeing the tomb of our Lord. They went to Nazareth, seeing the birthplace of our Lord, and then it inspired the imagination of the Europeans. And so obviously, they couldn't go to the Holy Land themselves. And so what they did, they brought the Holy Land to Europe. And so began the Stations of the Cross. As we meditate now upon the stations here. And that's what we will do. And the reason why 40,000 of our brothers went was because they were inspired by the faith of our Lord. And that if our Lord would endure all of this, as these stations will show and depict, how can I not respond in love when my brothers in the East are calling for our help? That is the true origin of the Crusades. That name, by the way, the Crusades, it means those who carry the cross. Because on their uniforms they emblaze the sign of our salvation. Oh, I'm not ashamed of the Crusades. Not when you understand the full, beautiful history. For we now shall carry the sign of God's greatest act of love.